Joining us here at Post 9 is Senator Elizabeth Warren. She's also just signed a new letter to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, alongside nearly 50 other Democrats, criticizing President Trump's tariffs as a corrupt scheme. Welcome, Senator Warren. It's great to have you here at Post 9. What a treat. All right, let's start on Powell. Sure. Just as a reminder, so Congress gives the Fed the authority. Can the president terminate, not that he said he's going to do this, but can he terminate Powell's chairmanship earlier than his ended term?
No.
Under no circumstance?
Nope.
So that's not a concern for you?
Does it? Well, I thought we were talking about legally, right? But this is a president who has shown himself willing to violate laws every place he goes, including willing to violate the Constitution of the United States. So that obviously puts things a little more in play than we ever would have guessed. But I really want to make a pitch here for a second about the importance of Powell staying in his job. Look,
and it's unusual coming from you. You're very critical of him.
I have tangled with him on a regular basis about both regulations and interest rates. But understand this. If Chairman Powell can be fired by the President of the United States, it will crash the markets in the United States. The infrastructure that keeps this stock market strong, and therefore a big part of our economy strong, and therefore a big part of the world economy strong, is the idea that the big pieces move independent of the politics, that somebody is making his, their, her best decisions economically and independently. We understand that if the New York Stock Exchange, if interest rates in the United States are subject to a president who just wants to wave his magic wand, this doesn't distinguish us then from any other two-bit dictatorship around the world where everyone knows what your big investment risk is. Will that dictator wake up in the morning and have a tummy ache and decide to cause this problem or favor that friend? That's why we need to strengthen the infrastructure.
But I know you are not the president, but you have also been very vocal in terms of wanting Fed Chair Powell to cut interest rates.
Sure.
Especially when he was raising it. And you and I have talked about, like, maybe you shouldn't inject your politics into the Fed. That's essentially all he's doing here.
Oh, that's the question. When he talks about terminating Powell, come on.
No, he said his termination cannot come soon enough. His term ends next year.
You think he was saying term in? Look, I hope he was saying term in. I think what he's doing is testing the waters. Does he think he can get away with firing Powell and all of you won't raise any hell about that? He's checking that out. And I'm just saying, for the strength of our country, I hope all of you are pushing back at this point.
Well, the bond market certainly would push back significantly.
Absolutely.
We're not seeing as much today. I do wonder, they have taken a case to the Supreme Court in which they're testing the ability of the president to fire heads of independent agencies. Is that an important decision? It may be sometimes until we hear of it, but if the court should side with the Trump administration, does that embolden him to move faster on Powell, for example?
Absolutely. That is the question that's going to the United States Supreme Court. But I just want you to note, even the government's briefs so far, at least as they've laid their argument out going to the Supreme Court, even they are itchy-scratchy about saying that would include the Fed. You know, can we just remember why we do this? Going back to 1863, our first financial regulator, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, still exists today. What did we do? We made them right in the middle of the Civil War. We decided we got to have a bank regulator for stability, right? Financial stability in our country. We made that bank regulator financially independent of Congress. It was a way to try to say, look, we understand what happens if elected officials, Congress or the President of the United States, can hear from a constituent, can hear from a donor, and then bring pressure on those financial regulators. Ultimately, it undercuts the entire economic system and makes us all vulnerable. Every financial regulator since then, the OCC, the credit industry, the CFPB, the old OTS, all of them have been financially independent. And we need to preserve that, not for the politics of the moment, not for whether I think the interest rate should go up or down 3 months ago when we had such a strong economy. but we need to preserve it because overall, that's what keeps the system strong year after year, decade after decade.
You would agree jawboning between the executive and the Fed is nothing new, right?
Jawboning is different.
How is it different than this? I mean, I'm curious. How is it different than this post?
Partly, jawboning occurs out in public, but nobody threatens anybody's job. At the end of the day, presidents always, even in the jawboning, have said, I recognize you are the one who makes the decision. Look, I will try to persuade Jerome Powell.
You said he would be responsible for 2 million job cuts.
I believe that. I am glad to do that. I do it in hearings. It's called oversight. But it's all out in public. Anybody can see it, and I don't threaten his job. And the President of the United States should not threaten.
He has said before he's not going to mess with Powell's job. Powell and Besson have lunch every week following a long-standing tradition. So I don't think the market's alarmed about it because I don't think they think that that's where it's going.
Well, if you want to rely on what President Trump said a few weeks ago, that's fine. Are you one of the people who relied on the fact that he would never, never, never back down from those tariffs? Or are you one of those people who said, no, now what he's going to do is a 10% across the board, but no exceptions? Oh, are you one of those people who said, I believe the president when he said it's going to be the exception for that donor and that friend and that one who is in my business?
So this is where, so you don't believe him clearly, and this is where it gets into your letter.
Yes.
So it's interesting. It feels like there's two issues that you have a problem with. The on-off, again, unpredictability of the tariffs and what you call the corruption. And on the corrupt, what evidence are you pointing to that this is a corrupt policy?
Well, he, right out in front, announces a tariff policy, says there are going to be no exceptions to that policy, and then he says, I talked to Tim Cook. Oh, really?
Shouldn't he be talking to the companies that it affects?
Well, then he follows it up by saying, and all of a sudden, great deal available for Tim Cook. Tim Cook, who, by the way, put $1 million.
It's a great deal available for Americans who have to buy iPhones.
No, it is a great deal for one company. But how many of the competitors now get hurt? In fact, I'd like to know what else goes on in this deal. Is it that Tim Cook and his interests get protection, but any of his competitors, I don't know, do they get a higher interest rate? What happens to them? The problem we've got here, and the thing is, Donald Trump actually has a history on this, as we point out in the letter. So, for example, tariffs with Argentina. Trump Enterprises, back during the first Trump administration, is trying to get approval of their logo, the Trump, to get it recognized in Argentina. And guess what?
I think it's that he just has a good relationship with the president there.
When he is negotiating a tariff deal, he negotiates on the behalf of everybody in the United States. And to pick, you get a special deal, you get smacked in the face, it has two consequences. One is that's just terrible. That's not how competition is supposed to work. But the second and the more pernicious here, it's like putting poison in the water. It means nobody can trust the system. There's no independence in the system. There's no fairness in the system. It's all whose palm did you grease, who did you suck up to in order to be treated better. Well, we have not built a strong economy in America based on that kind of pay to play.
We did have some conversations yesterday that NVIDIA's seeming attempts to cozy up didn't pay off on these exports, these curbs, right?
Yeah, and does that make you feel better? That's the whole point. They think that's the right answer. So what we ask for in this letter is a little transparency. Could we hear when people are asking for special exceptions to the tariff? Could you make a record of that? Will all of those requests come through the president? Can we hear about them when they come, for example, through the trade rep or through the Secretary of Treasury? Why wouldn't you want to have that information if it is all above board? Then everyone can know what's going on.
This required a declaration of an emergency for the president to impose these tariffs without, obviously, congressional approval, which has typically been the realm of where tariffs came from. But you're not in power. I mean, the Democratic Party seems to have less power than it's ever had in recent memory, Senator. So I wonder, do you have any expectation on the part of your Republican colleagues that they're going to try to move against that emergency power?
So remember, exactly as you say, Donald Trump can do all this. He moves the market. I mean, can we all just pause for this, is pushing us where economists are saying heading into a recession, may already be in one. Wall Street is saying that. And not caused by a virus, a pandemic, not caused by loading up on debt over years in the mortgage market, but caused by one man who gets up one morning and decides to play the up-down game, red light, green light, on tariffs. He does this, as you say, under an emergency order. The order itself in the statute says, but Congress can say, yo, we are not in an emergency. We're not in an emergency with Belgium. We are not in an emergency with virtually every country.
But he's taking on China, which you've been railing against. Their unfair He's doing what you have wanted.
Take on China. Tell me why there's a 10% tariff on Belgium. Can you tell me what the emergency is?
What about the emergency? Is there any hope that your Republican colleagues are going to stand up and support you?
You are asking the right question. The statute is Congress can say at any point, not an emergency, and that rolls back the ability of the Trump administration to do this up-down, red light, green light on tariffs. So we are going to have a vote on that in about 2 weeks. Senator Wyden and I have already introduced the bill on this. It's a privileged motion. That means we've got all 47 Democrats ready to go. The question is, a handful of Republicans are just going to have to make the decision. Are they here to bend over to whatever Donald Trump wants to do, no matter what it's doing to the markets, no matter how much, listen to Jerome Powell, it's driving up costs for American families, it's going to drive up unemployment, it's going to wipe out small businesses? Or is your job to stand up for this country? And that's the question.
You're not going to get the votes. You're not going to get the votes.
We got it in the trade war with Canada.
Right.
It was the first crack in the wall.
McConnell.
We got 4 Republicans who crossed the aisle that gave us a majority.
But it ultimately doesn't matter.
What do you mean it ultimately doesn't matter? This is the law. I'm
because
still kind of Constitution 101.
No, but he has the authority, ultimately.
Well, no, he does not. That's the whole point. He does not have the authority if Congress does not let him keep this authority. We can take this away.
Yeah. Can I get you?
He has declared an emergency. That's what gives him the authority. Otherwise, it belongs to Congress.
Before you go, how do you think the Harvard situation resolves itself, if at all?
Look, I'm looking for the off-ramp here for the Trump administration. People are asking around the country, why are we better off to cut research on cancer, on Alzheimer's, on tuberculosis? You know, that's where this money goes. These are research grants, and these are research grants. They weren't given out politically. They were given out to people who are doing work that helps keep us all safer and healthier. We are not better and stronger because Donald Trump wakes up one day and decides he wants to cut that research. So I think I'm actually very proud of Harvard to stand up and say, we're not going to do that.
But here's the thing. Then how should they be held accountable for failing to protect civil rights of Jewish students? And also, you know, this question about the tax-exempt status, which there are reports that he's trying to take away for political entity, there's ample evidence that a lot of the faculty that they employ are progressive and is increasingly political.
So if you believe that, go to court. Go to court. You start the process, and you know what? Instead of just mouthing off about what you think is happening, actually present some evidence. And let's look at the evidence. Let's let the other side come in and question that evidence. But you don't just get to lip off and say, and therefore the king gets to wave his magic wand and say, off with your head.
Doesn't the government determine where federal tax dollars go? Well, and so they're allowed to decide.
Do you think they have a big bushel basket of money and they just say, you, good looking, you will have money. You, not so good looking, you're going to have to go hungry for a while. That's not how it works. Let's just do Con Law 101, and that is Congress writes those laws and allocates that money. The administration's job is to enforce those laws and spend that money the way the law tells them. And if they fail to do that, Part 3 is the courts are the ones who step in and enforce the law. That's the three parts.
Unless you defy or find probable cause that you've defied a judicial order.
Well, that's the whole point now. But the point is, We still in the United States have a Constitution, and whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, that's what serves all of us. And that's what keeps us all strong. That's what gives us a chance to build prosperity. You take that away, and it may work great for a handful of billionaires, but for everybody else in this country, for every kid who needs that public school, for every senior who needs that Social Security check, for every veteran who counts on the promise that was made to him or her, you take that away, and our country is not just a little bit poorer. Our country fundamentally breaks apart.
You'll have to come back. We didn't even get to Doge. There's so many issues.
I'm ready.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, it's so good to have you here. Thank you very much. Never did I think you would be sitting here defending Jay Powell and the markets against tariffs.
I knew you would.
All right. Thank you.
Good.